Day 90. The most expensive stalemate in modern history has turned the Strait of Hormuz into a digital toll road. This is the world's most critical oil artery, now held hostage by the PGSA agency. They demand up to $2 million per vessel, and they demand it in Bitcoin or Chinese yuan. International law has evaporated under the shadow of interdiction. Since February, the flow of commerce has slowed to a crawl. Only 150 ships have cleared the strait in these 3 months, a volume that once moved in a single day. The artery is tightening. Every tanker forced to anchor or turn back is a pulse missing from the global economy. The supply lines are not just strained, they are being systematically severed. As the blockade holds, the world watches the numbers drop. The global economy is beginning to suffocate, and the toll is rising with every passing hour of the standoff. The world looked to the high-stakes summit between Trump and Xi for a lifeline. It was a moment built on the promise of de-escalation, a chance to reopen the locked artery of the strait. Instead, the meeting dissolved into a hollow spectacle. No deal on tariffs, no resolution on semiconductors, no leverage applied to the Hormuz crisis. The diplomatic window slammed shut, leaving the world with nothing but empty rhetoric. Markets reacted with immediate, sharp volatility. The S&P tumbled 1.24% as the realization set in. Oil prices surged, climbing to $105.48 per barrel in a direct response to the failure. Diplomacy without teeth had left the global economy completely exposed. The blockade was not ending, it was hardening. Investors scrambled to reprice the risk. The summit had failed, and the markets were now paying the price for that silence. While diplomacy faltered, the Federal Reserve entered a volatile new era under Chair Kevin Warsh. The shift was immediate and jarring. Warsh abandoned the long-standing practice of forward guidance, stripping away the transparency that markets rely on to price risk. It is the equivalent of driving through a violent storm with the headlights extinguished. Investors are now forced to navigate by instinct alone, and the data reflects the resulting panic. The 1-year Treasury yield has spiked to 4.6%, a sharp climb that signals deep instability. The probability of a rate hike in 2026 has crossed the 50% threshold, shattering the previous consensus of stability. Every move by the Fed is now a matter of dangerous speculation. The clarity that once defined the central bank's communication has evaporated. Traders are scrambling to adjust their models, but the foundation of their projections has been pulled out from under them. The path forward is no longer mapped. It is a blind descent into uncharted economic territory. The era of the unknown has begun. The instability at the top is now tearing the domestic economy apart. A K-shaped divide is fracturing the nation, creating two distinct realities. On one side, the affluent continue to spend, seemingly insulated from the tightening grip of the blockade. On the other, the bottom half of the population faces a brutal daily erosion of purchasing power. The cost of survival is skyrocketing. Gas prices have hit $4.54 per gallon, acting as a regressive tax that drains the remaining disposable income of working families. Grocery bills climb every week, forcing households to choose between essential goods and basic services. Real wages have turned negative, failing to keep pace with the relentless surge in inflation. This is the onset of classic stagflation, where prices rise while economic output stagnates. The buffer that once protected the middle class has evaporated. Every trip to the pump and every visit to the checkout counter serves as a reminder of the widening gap. The economy is no longer a single unified system. It is a split track. For millions, the dream of stability has been replaced by the immediate, crushing weight of rising costs. The crisis is no longer confined to balance sheets and gas pumps. It is now seeping into the soil. Essential fertilizer components like urea and ammonia are trapped behind the same Hormuz blockade that has strangled the global oil supply. This is a silent, creeping failure that threatens the entire agricultural sector. Morningstar projections indicate that nitrogen fertilizer prices could double in the coming weeks, a cost spike that farmers cannot absorb. Faced with these prohibitive prices, agricultural producers are forced to reduce application rates. across millions of acres. This is not merely a budgetary decision. It is a direct assault on crop viability. The math is brutal. Less fertilizer means lower yields, and lower yields mean a looming food supply shortage. Experts are now pointing toward a catastrophic collapse in production for the third and fourth quarters. The United States is uniquely vulnerable here, lacking any strategic fertilizer reserve to buffer against this disruption. The shockwave is delayed, but it is inevitable. We are moving from a crisis of currency to a crisis of calories. The failure to secure these inputs has set the stage for a systemic food shortage. The structural rot is now visible in the skies and on the balance sheets of local lenders. Spirit Airlines has officially collapsed, a casualty of the fuel price surge that rendered its business model untenable. This is not an isolated failure. It is the first major domino in the transportation sector. Other carriers are now scrambling, demanding billions in emergency fuel relief just to maintain basic operations. The contagion has moved rapidly into the financial sector. Community banks, which provided the lifeblood of credit to local energy firms, are now under intense scrutiny. Their exposure to the energy sector is proving to be a fatal liability as the blockade persists. Delinquency rates are climbing across the board. Auto loans are defaulting at an accelerating pace, and credit card balances are being written off as households prioritize basic needs over debt service. The banks are tightening their lending standards, effectively choking off the remaining credit flow to small businesses. This is a systemic failure of domestic infrastructure. The financial system is losing its ability to absorb the shock, and the cracks are no longer just widening, they are beginning to buckle under the weight of the ongoing stalemate. The contagion has breached the borders of the United States, proving that no economy is an island in this energy-starved landscape. Europe is the first major casualty of the systemic slowdown, with growth stalling at a precarious 0.1%. The industrial engines of the continent are sputtering as the cost of imported energy renders manufacturing margins impossible to sustain. Across the globe, the situation is far more dire. Nations from Cuba to Pakistan are being forced into the dark, suffering from severe, rolling, energy-induced blackouts. In Pakistan, the lack of fuel for power generation has brought the national grid to its knees, leaving millions without electricity for hours on end. This is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a fundamental breakdown of the energy-dependent infrastructure that supports modern society. The ripple effect of the Hormuz blockade is now universal. When the world's most critical oil artery is held hostage, the entire global supply chain experiences a synchronized failure. The global economy is not merely slowing down. It is being systematically dismantled. The world remains trapped in a state of precarious suspension. The markets are currently pricing in a level of optimism that ignores the raw reality of the supply shock. Investors are betting on a swift resolution, but the data suggests a far more complex landscape. As we look toward the future, 4 distinct paths emerge. The first is a breakthrough deal, a sudden diplomatic pivot that restores the flow of energy. The second is a prolonged stalemate, where the current friction becomes the permanent baseline of global trade. The third is a violent escalation, where the blockade triggers a direct military confrontation. The fourth is a slow, partial normalization, a grinding process of adaptation. None of these outcomes are guaranteed, yet the market continues to speculate on a return to normalcy. This disconnect is dangerous. The fog is set to lift, and the timeline for this clarity is fixed. All eyes are now locked on 2 critical events. The June 10 CPI report will reveal the true extent of the inflationary pressure, and the June 17 FOMC meeting will force the Federal Reserve to show its hand. Until these numbers hit the screens, the world remains in a state of precarious suspension. The current calm is not a sign of stability. It is the silence before the next wave. The fog of uncertainty does not dissipate simply because we wish it to. It remains thick and impenetrable, clinging to the global markets and the corridors of power. We are currently living through a period where the traditional indicators of stability have been rendered useless, replaced by the erratic pulse of a supply chain in total collapse. For the individual, the temptation to react to every headline or every minor fluctuation is immense. Yet, in this environment, reaction is often the precursor to ruin. The path forward is not illuminated by speculation or the frantic search for a quick recovery. It is defined by the reality of the standoff in the Strait of Hormuz and the structural fractures it has exposed within our domestic economy. We must accept that the current state of suspension is not a temporary glitch, but the defining feature of the months ahead. Information is the only currency that retains its value when the markets turn volatile. Track the data, ignore the noise, and recognize that the systems we once relied upon are currently undergoing a forced, painful recalibration. Do not mistake the current silence for safety. The pressures building beneath the surface of the global economy are immense, and they will find their release in the coming weeks. Until the data provides a clear signal, the most effective strategy is one of disciplined observation. Protect your capital, maintain your focus, and prepare for a landscape that will look nothing like the one we left behind. Stay patient, stay informed, and above all, stay hibernating.